They weren't only warriors, they were nightmares come to life on the battlefield. Forget everything you believed you understood about Native American tribes. These were the generals, tacticians, and warriors that made even the most battle-hardened enemies tremble with terror. From scalp-taking Mohawks to the unknown perpetrators of the Crow Creek massacre, these tribes understood the art of terror well before modern warfare existed. Prepare to discover history's most terrifying Native American tribes you never knew about in school textbooks. 10. The Mohawk. The scalp-taking warriors, the Mohawk, part of the Iroquois Confederacy, were one of the most feared warriors in the northeastern United States. The Mohawk were renowned for their martial abilities and their merciless style of combat, and they were legendary for scalping their dead enemies as trophies. Not only was this a mark of victory, it was also a terrifying message to their enemies that resistance was futile. Their warriors were skilled in ambush and stealth warfare, often assaulting settlements with devastating surprise. Mohawk warriors employed deadly war clubs and tomahawks in battle, making them a terror to colonial militias and hostile tribes alike. The Mohawks' intimidation factor was fed by their distinctive look. Male warriors would shave the sides of their heads with a strip of hair down the middle, the original Mohawk haircut that's still named today. It was not just fashion, it was psychological warfare intended to unnerve opponents before battle even began. What made the Mohawks so feared was that they had a huge alliance network through the Iroquois Confederacy. You attack one Mohawk village, you risked bringing down the wrath of the entire Confederacy upon you. Their political organization gave them a military advantage that no other tribe could match, and that they could methodically overwhelm foes through coordinated campaigns, rather than being restricted to hit-and-run attacks. 9. The Apache. Masters of guerrilla warfare. The Apache were one of the finest guerrilla fighters in history. Living in the harsh deserts of the Southwest, these warriors adapted to the merciless environment, making it work for them in battle. They were famous for their hit-and-run method of attack, striking their enemies and then disappearing into the mountains. Apache warriors were also prone to scalping and torturing their captives, causing terror among settlers and rival tribes. One of the most famous Apache leaders, Geronimo, waged a long guerrilla war against Mexican and American armies, evading armies much larger than his own. The Apache's incredible endurance was legendary. Warriors were reportedly able to run 50 miles without a rest and survive on minimal water in desert conditions that would kill most outsiders within a few days. This physical conditioning allowed them to pursue enemies long after conventional forces would have given up the pursuit, creating the impression that Apache warriors were almost supernatural in their abilities. Their war philosophy was to cause maximum damage with minimal risk. Apache raiders would strike settlements, military forts, or supply columns with devastating precision before melting away again into the countryside. They perfected the ambush, luring enemies into narrow canyons or mountain passes where their superior knowledge of the country made them overwhelmingly superior, even when outnumbered. 8. The Comanche, Lords of the Plains. The Comanche were arguably the greatest horsemen of any of the Native American tribes. Their ability to fight on horseback with deadly precision made them the undisputed masters of the Great Plains. Comanche warriors would ride full gallop, firing arrows with deadly precision while barely touching the ground. They were notorious for their brutality to captives, often torturing prisoners for hours or even days before they killed them. The Comanche were so feared that even hardened Texas Rangers and United States cavalry soldiers dreaded engaging them in battle. The Comanche's dominance was so complete that they effectively closed off the westward expansion of Spanish colonial territories and later hindered American settlement of Texas and the southern plains. At their height in the early 19th century, they dominated a vast empire from southern Kansas to northern Mexico, an area known as Comanche. What made them absolutely terrifying was that they were versatile. When horses were introduced into North America, the Comanche became more fully horsemen than any other plains community, evolving within a few generations from a relatively minor hunter-gatherer band into the southern plains' most dominant military force. Comanche boys were taught to ride almost as soon as they were able to walk, and it created warriors of such exceptional skill that they were able to fire arrows with precision while hanging from the side of a galloping horse, utilizing the body of the horse as a shield. 7. The Pawnee, warriors with a taste for revenge. The Pawnee were well known for their ferocity in battle and had a long tradition of raiding other tribes. They were extremely skilled warriors, and their reputation for cannibalism only added to the terror that they instilled. Pawnee warriors have been said to have consumed parts of their enemies after battle because they believed that it would strengthen them. Their enemies feared their ruthless desire for vengeance, for the Pawnee responded with even greater violence than they had endured. If you provoked them, you'd better be prepared for war. The Pawnee warrior society was very religious, and war was a religious endeavor. Warriors underwent extensive purification rites before they went to war and were blessed by shamans. They believed that these rites gave them supernatural power and protection in combat and made them fearless in battle. Many enemies reported that Pawnee warriors fought as though they cared nothing for their own safety. What made their reputation even more feared was their identification with human sacrifice. The Pawnee were one of the few Plains tribes that were known to practice ritual human sacrifice, most prominently as part of their morning star ceremony. While such sacrifices were rare and typically involved captured enemies, it contributed to their reputation as a tribe willing to go to an extreme that other tribes would not. 6. The Huron, the torture experts. The Huron were well known for their brutal torture techniques, especially on enemy captives. They used elaborate trials of pain that went on for days on end, keeping their victims alive as long as possible to extend pain. One particularly inhumane practice was the flaying alive of prisoners. The psychological warfare waged by the Huron was just as effective as their physical practices, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. The torture rituals of the Huron were not simply a matter of inflicting pain. They were heavily steeped in their religious ideology. They viewed torture as a way to test the courage of prisoners and draw out their spiritual energy. The bravery shown by victims during torture was revered, and those who endured pain stoically were sometimes adopted into the tribe rather than killed. Their warfare was unique in that it tended to concentrate on capturing enemies, as opposed to slaughtering them in battle. A successful raid would be one in which dozens of enemy warriors were captured as opposed to being killed in the field. This instilled fear in the surrounding tribes, as warriors knew that they could suffer a worse fate than death if they were taken by the Huron. 5. The Choctaw, masters of psychological warfare. The Choctaw were infamous for being able to intimidate their enemies before they even picked up a weapon. They used elaborate war dances, face-painted with terrifying designs, and let out blood-curdling war whoops that sent shivers down the battlefield. The Choctaw warriors believed in outsmarting their enemies, using trickery and sly ambushes to defeat them. Their tactics were so effective that both Union and Confederate forces contracted the services of Choctaw fighters during the Civil War. What was so powerful about the Choctaw was that they engaged in ritualized warfare. Warriors would train intensively spiritually before combat, fasting, undergoing purification ceremonies, and war dancing. These ceremonies served the double purpose of psychically preparing warriors for combat and of presenting a frightening spectacle that would frighten adversaries who might see or hear them. The Choctaw were equally skilled at producing and employing biological weapons, long before such concepts were formalized in contemporary warfare. They were able to utilize poisonous vegetation to produce toxins for their inventory, and in some accounts, they would poison enemy water supplies during extended combat, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of how to optimize destruction beyond conventional combat. The Blackfoot, the nightmare of the Northern Plains. The Blackfoot were one of the most dreaded of the Northern Plains tribes for their constant fighting and brutal treatment of captives. Unlike some tribes that specialized in defense, the Blackfoot were expansionists who constantly looked to dominate new territory. Blackfoot warriors excelled in surprise attacks, tending to attack settlements at night and taking no prisoners. They employed a fighting reputation as brutes to terrorize their enemies long before they even engaged in combat. Their name itself, Blackfoot, ought to have been derived from the distinctive black paint with which they decorated their moccasins, perhaps from ash of old campfires. It carried a psychological effect. If an enemy found black tracks around their camps, they knew exactly on whom to attribute having spied on them, and it caused panic to instantly set in. It was the Blackfoot's advanced social structure that made them so successful on the battlefield. Young men developed through carefully organized warrior societies with their own rituals, requirements, and advanced combat strategies. This generated a culture of perpetual military innovation and competitive superiority among the warriors, who were always seeking to make themselves by pulling off ever braver feats on the battlefield. 3. The Haida, the Viking raiders of North America. The Haida, a seafaring Pacific Northwest tribe, were known as the Vikings of North America. They launched coastal raids in massive war canoes, attacking enemy tribes and villages with brutal effectiveness. Haida warriors were well tattooed and wore intimidating masks when they went to battle in order to fill their enemies with fear. Their raids for slaves were so notorious that neighboring tribes dreaded a raid at any given time. Haida were not only warriors, but they were ruthless conquerors. Their massive cedar canoes up to more than 60 feet in length, carrying 60 warriors, allowed them to strike with disastrous speed over extensive distances. Haida raiders could travel hundreds of miles up and down the Pacific coast between Alaska and California, and therefore maintain an operational span that few other Native American combat units could access. It was their cultural emphasis on gaining wealth and slaves by raiding which made the Haida particularly feared. While most of the other tribes only fought over land or resources, the Haida had incorporated warfare highly into their economy. Theirs was a heavily stratified society, and the nobles defended their status through possessions and spoils of raid slaves. It provided a sustained incentive to war, as promising warriors were intent on elevating their status via successful raids. 2. The Shawnee, resistance warriors of American expansion. The Shawnee were one of the most powerful enemies of American expansion to the west. Under such great leaders as Tecumseh, they formed powerful alliances in an effort to resist the intrusions of the settlers onto their land. Shawnee warriors were renowned for their unyielding will and their ability to turn even most desperate fights into victories. They employed brutally merciless vengeance against anyone who wronged them, making them arguably the most feared force in early 19th century North America. What made the Shawnee so impressive was their outstanding military leadership. Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, the Prophet, built one of the greatest pan-Indian resistance movements in history, uniting tribes that had been enemies to oppose American expansion. Their strategic vision was above tactics to grand strategy, realizing only through unity could Native Americans defy successfully the tide of settlement. The Shawnee were also battlefield bravadoed. They even devised combat strategies that were specifically aimed at disarming American military capabilities, e.g., how to disable artillery usage and quash cavalry assaults. They were also trained to fight anywhere, dense forests or open plains, so that they were ambidextrous combatants who could never be overlooked even by veterans in the Army. 1. The Crow Creek Massacre Tribe. A mysterious horror. One of the most terrorizing tribes in Native American history is a mysterious one, the tribe behind the Crow Creek Massacre. Archaeologists discovered a mass grave containing over 500 brutally slaughtered men, women, and children, who are believed to be victims of one of the bloodiest tribal conflicts in history. These nameless fighters who committed this massacre did not merely kill their adversaries. They hacked them up, shaved their scalps, and left them stark naked as an example to all others. Even to this day, historians continue to debate whether the perpetrators were of this or that tribe, but one fact remains: this tribe was evil and absolutely terror-inducing. Archaeological evidence at the Crow Creek site in South Dakota illustrates the scope of the horror. Analysis of the skeletons is proof of large-scale torture, victims suffering numerous injuries before they were slain. Nearly all had been scalped, and many bore signs of dismemberment, hands and feet having been severed, apparently as souvenirs. The scale of violence is consistent not just with war, but also a commitment to erase the victim group from the face of the earth. The most chilling aspect of the Crow Creek Massacre is how it shows the extreme extent to which some Native American warfare could reach. While most of the tribal conflicts did have some sort of protocols and rules of engagement, this incident demonstrates that in certain circumstances, perhaps fierce competition for resources or a cycle of revenge, tribal warfare could be taken to genocidal heights. The as-yet unknown perpetrators of this massacre are the scariest warriors in Native American history precisely because they are unidentified. They represent the worst that human war can be. These war tribes honed combat tactics that struck terror into the hearts of enemies for centuries. Their military genius and psychological warfare legacy changed the course of North American history. Their tactics will horrify modern sensibilities, but these warriors were defending their homelands and ways of life with whatever weapons they could find. Would you have lived through an encounter with one of these warrior tribes? Let us know what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth examinations of history's most shocking stories.